If your body has ever done something strange and unexplained, shaking for no reason, crying without a sad thought in sight, a breath that suddenly let your whole body drop, you've probably brushed it off as your body just being weird. Your leg trembles in the middle of a massage. When nothing is wrong, you're holding a stretch, and out of nowhere, tears come with no story behind them. You exhale, and your shoulders drop 2 inches, like you just set down something heavy you didn't know you were carrying. A yawn arrives uninvited. A shiver runs through you on a warm day. Often, those moments are not the body malfunctioning. They are the nervous system trying to finish something it started a long time ago. And once you see what that something is, you'll never look at your own body the same way again. There's a moment that happens in almost every somatic therapy session, and almost nobody talks about it directly. A woman is lying on a massage table, completely relaxed, when her leg starts to shake. Not because she's cold, not because she's scared. It just starts. A fine tremor, rising from her calf, traveling up through her thigh, and she doesn't try to stop it because somehow, without being told, she knows it's not a problem. It feels strangely like relief. A man in a trauma-informed yoga class holds a simple hip-opening pose for 90 seconds, and without warning, he starts crying. Not sad crying, not happy crying, just crying, the way clouds release rain when they've been holding too much water for too long. A teenager doing a breathing exercise with a school counselor exhales longer than she inhales, again and again, and somewhere around the 7th breath, her shoulders drop 2 inches and her jaw, which has been clenched since she walked into the room, finally lets go. None of these people did anything dramatic. No one had a breakthrough insight. No one solved a problem. Their bodies just moved, shook, cried, dropped, and somehow, on the other side of it, they felt different, lighter, more here. If you've ever experienced something like this, a shake that came from nowhere, a sob that arrived without a sad thought attached, a sudden exhale that felt like setting down a bag you didn't know you were carrying, you may have wondered what actually happened. Was it emotional? Was it physical? Was it nothing? Just your body being strange? Let that question sit for a moment, because we're about to spend the next 20-some minutes circling back to it from 5 completely different directions. There is a quiet detail buried inside the world of body-based healing that most people never notice. Because most people only ever try one approach. They do yoga, or they do breathwork, or they try EMDR, or they stumble into something called Somatic Experiencing because a friend recommended it. Each modality has its own vocabulary, its own founder, its own theory of what's happening. And if you only ever try one, you'll walk away believing that that particular technique is what helped you. But something different happens when you stop comparing techniques by their stories and start comparing them by what they actually do to the body. Strip away the language, strip away the branding, and you find the same reflex, showing up again and again, under different names, invented by people who, in most cases, never spoke to each other. This is not a coincidence. This is a pattern. And by the end of this, you're going to see it everywhere. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to walk through 5 separate approaches to healing the body, each developed independently, each with its own history, and at the end of each one, we're going to ask the same simple question: what is actually happening underneath the theory? Then we're going to put them side by side and let you see what they were all quietly describing the whole time. Let's begin with the one that started it, in a sense the work of a man named Peter Levine. In the 1970s, Levine was studying something curious about wild animals. A gazelle, chased by a cheetah, sometimes goes completely limp mid-chase, collapses, plays dead, even while still conscious. It's not a choice. It's a hardwired survival response, the last resort when fight and flight aren't possible. And here's the part that fascinated Levine: when that gazelle survives, if the cheetah gets distracted. If the chase breaks off, the animal doesn't just calmly stand up and walk away. It shakes, violently. For 10, 20, 30 seconds, its whole body trembles, almost convulsing, before it gets up and trots off as if nothing happened. Levine's insight was this: that shaking is the nervous system completing something. The energy mobilized for fight or flight, which never got used because the animal had to freeze instead, doesn't just disappear. It has to be discharged. The tremor is the discharge. And once it's released, the animal's body resets. No lingering hypervigilance, no flashbacks. Animals in the wild experience life-threatening events constantly and, as far as we can tell, rarely develop anything resembling chronic trauma the way humans do. Levine's question, the one that became his life's work, was simple and unsettling. What if humans have the exact same reflex, but we've been taught to suppress it? Think about it. When was the last time you saw an adult shake after a scare? We hold our breath. We tense our jaw. We say, "I'm fine," through gritted teeth. We override the shake because shaking looks like weakness, or looks strange, or simply isn't socially acceptable in a meeting or at a dinner table. Levine's method, Somatic Experiencing, is essentially built on giving the body permission, slowly and safely, to finish what it started, to let that tremor happen in a controlled setting, till years or decades later than it was supposed to. That's the woman on the massage table. Her leg wasn't malfunctioning. It was finally finishing a sentence her body had been holding mid-word for years. Let that land for a second. Then let's go somewhere completely different, somewhere with no therapist's couch at all. In the early 2000s, a man named David Berceli was working with civilians in conflict zones, places where formal therapy wasn't accessible, where there weren't enough trained clinicians for the scale of trauma around him. He needed something simple enough to teach a room of 200 people in an afternoon. What he developed is now called TRE, tension and trauma-releasing exercises. The method itself looks almost absurdly simple. A series of exercises that mildly fatigue specific muscle groups in the legs and hips, followed by lying down in a particular position. And then, often within minutes, the body begins to tremor involuntarily, rhythmically, sometimes for just a few minutes, sometimes much longer. Berceli wasn't working from Levine's research when he developed this. He arrived at tremoring from a completely different angle, physiological fatigue triggering what he called the body's innate shaking mechanism. Different door, same room. Notice what's happening here. Two people, on two different continents, working with two completely different populations, one in clinical offices with individual trauma survivors, one in refugee camps with mass civilian populations, independently landed on the conclusion that the body has a built-in tremor mechanism for discharging stored survival energy, and that giving it permission to run is, itself, the medicine. That's one coincidence. Let's see if it holds up against a third. Much more clinical, much more unlikely source. EMDR eye movement. Desensitization and reprocessing sounds nothing like shaking on a yoga mat. It involves a therapist guiding a client through specific eye movements or alternating taps, while the client briefly recalls a distressing memory. It was developed in the late 1980s by Francine Shapiro, almost by accident, after she noticed that moving her eyes side to side while thinking about something upsetting seemed to reduce its emotional intensity. For years, the mechanism behind EMDR was genuinely mysterious, even to its practitioners. But what current research increasingly points to is the rhythmic, bilateral stimulation, eyes moving left and right, or taps alternating hand to hand, appears to engage the same kind of parasympathetic shift you'd expect from rhythmic physical movement, while the nervous system, in a state of dual attention, reprocesses the stored memory without becoming overwhelmed by it. The body, again, is being given a structured, rhythmic pathway to discharge and refile something that got stuck. No shaking, no tremor, and yet structurally, the same underlying move. A safe, contained, rhythmic process that lets the nervous system finish what it couldn't finish in the original moment. And settle. Are you starting to feel it? 3 completely different rooms, a body-based trauma therapist's office, a refugee tent, and a clinical EMDR session converging on the same underlying logic. Even when the people who built each method had never spoken to each other. Now, here's where a careful person should pause and ask the obvious question. Are we just cherry-picking 3 trauma therapies and pretending they're more aligned than they really are? Of course, shaking and rhythmic movement sound similar. They're literally about the body. That's a fair, necessary doubt to sit with for a moment before we go further. So let's test the pattern against something that has nothing to do with trauma history at all, and see if it still holds. Consider something almost laughably ordinary, humming, or singing, or, more specifically, the practice found in chanting traditions, in breathwork classes, in vocal toning exercises taught by speech therapists for entirely unrelated reasons of making a low, sustained vocal sound and feeling it vibrate through the chest and throat. Here's the detail. Almost nobody connects the vagus nerve, the primary highway of your parasympathetic nervous system. Runs directly through the muscles of your throat, your vocal cords, and the back of your soft palate, humming, chanting, gargling, and slow exhales with a vocalized sound all mechanically stimulate the vagus nerve. This isn't folklore, it's basic neuroanatomy. The same reason singers and speech-language pathologists have long noticed effects on heart rate and calm that have nothing to do with the lyrics or the spiritual intention behind the sound. So now we have a 4th, totally unrelated entry point, not psychotherapy, not trauma protocol. Just the physical mechanics of making a low sound landing on the exact same destination, vagal engagement, parasympathetic activation, the literal physiological signature of safety. And one more, because the pattern deserves a final, undeniable witness. Trauma-informed yoga, the kind taught specifically for nervous system regulation rather than flexibility or fitness, frequently uses long, held positions paired with extended exhales. Research into this practice, separate entirely from the somatic therapy and TRE lineages, has repeatedly found the same marker increased heart rate variability, a measurable sign of a nervous system shifting out of sympathetic dominance and into parasympathetic regulation. The man crying in that hip opener wasn't accessing a buried memory through insight. His hip flexors muscles long associated, anatomically, with the psoas and the body's flight response were simply being held in a position long enough, with breath slow enough, for his nervous system to finally downshift. The tears were the exhaust of that shift, not its cause. Now put them side by side. Somatic experiencing discharge stored survival energy through tremor. TRE, the same tremor, reached through muscle fatigue instead of memory work. EMDR, rhythmic bilateral stimulation, completing a stuck stress response without overwhelming the system. Vocal toning, direct mechanical stimulation of the vagus nerve through sound. Trauma-informed yoga, extended holds and exhales, shifting heart rate variability toward parasympathetic dominance. 5 doors, 5 different founders, decades and continents apart, several of whom had no exposure to each other's work at all, and every single one of them, in their own language, with their own technique, with their own clientele, arrived at describing the same underlying event, the nervous system being given permission, through rhythm, discharge, or sustained safety signaling, to release the vagal brake and return to a state of regulation. They never spoke to each other. They still ended up at the same conclusion. That's not a coincidence. That's a description of something that was already true about the body, discovered independently from 5 different angles, the way explorers from different countries, sailing in different directions, kept finding the same continent. This is worth being honest about something. Though, because the skeptic in you deserves a straight answer. Somatic work is not a cure-all, and the research base, while growing, is still younger and thinner than research on more established treatments. Heart rate variability studies have real, replicable signal, but they measure a physiological shift, not a guaranteed emotional resolution. None of this means a shake or a sigh will erase trauma in one session, and none of it means every modality works equally well for every person or every kind of wound. What it does mean is something more modest and, honestly, more useful. Your body has a built-in mechanism for finishing incomplete stress responses. And a surprising number of independently developed practices have found ways to access it. Which brings us back to that question from the beginning. The shake on the massage table, the tears in the hip opener, the exhale that finally let a clenched jaw go. None of those were malfunctions. None of those needed an explanation rooted in weakness, or oversensitivity, or being too much. They were your nervous system, doing exactly what it was designed to do. The moment it finally felt safe enough to do it. Here is something you can test for yourself. Right now, without changing anything about your life or committing to a new routine. Notice, over the next day or two, if your body ever does something small and involuntary, a yawn that comes out of nowhere, an unexpected shiver, a sigh that seems to escape on its own, a sudden urge to stretch in a particular direction. Instead of brushing past it, just pause for 3 or 4 seconds. Don't interpret it. Don't analyze why. Just let it complete itself instead of swallowing it back down. That's it. That's the whole experiment. Most of us spend our lives interrupting that reflex without ever knowing we're doing it, clearing our throat instead of letting the sound out, tensing instead of trembling, holding our breath instead of letting the exhale run all the way to its natural end. Every modality we walked through tonight, in its own language, was really just finding a way to stop interrupting. You didn't change anything. You just became aware, and that changed everything. This is Conscious Shift,